Grand Rising. Hello, how you doing, powerful being? Okay, so we're reading chapter 3 of the book, The E-Myth Enterprise by Michael A. Gerber, How to Turn a Great Idea into a Thriving Business. Okay, chapter 3 is entitled The E-Myth Enterprise Matrix, the 4 categories of preference. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and read chapter 3 of the book, The E-Myth Enterprise. So just so you know, this is a book club, and it's the Holistic Book Club, in fact. A book club, part of the Holistic Lifestyle Tribe, where we can grow and learn from the different picks of books that's going to help us grow ourselves, grow our brands, grow our businesses. So we're reading E-Myth Enterprise January through February, and we're in chapter 3. So I'm going to make sure to read out chapter 3 for you, so that way you can go back and listen to it, so that way you can get it on your own. All right, so let's get it going. Hopefully everybody can hear me. You're tapped in. Let's go ahead and start chapter 3, the E-Myth Enterprise Matrix, the 4 categories of preference. The constituents of matter and the basic phenomena involving them are all interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. They cannot be understood as isolated entities, but only as integrated parts of a whole. Okay, they're not in. Fritjof Capra, the Tao of physics. Okay, so that was just a quote from the Tao of physics. So let's keep tapping in to chapter 3. Starting. On my 16th birthday, many years ago, I brought a very special car. It was a 1947 Ford Coupe. I think of John Anderson, the man who sold it to me, as the quintessential entrepreneur. Not that I thought of him like that at the time. At the time, I wasn't interested in business. I was simply a 16-year-old boy who was about to negotiate the most important decision of life. And John Anderson was the man who was either going to make it possible or not. In retrospect, I know that John Anderson was a business genius. Whether by intention or not, he did every little thing right. A few words about John Anderson. He wasn't in business at all, but an engineer working in Lockheed. I saw his small classified ad in the Aeneum Bulletin announcing the fact that he had a 1947 Ford for sale. The ad said mysteriously, "Once you see it, you wonder why." I called, scheduled an appointment for the following day after school, then proceeded to climb the walls for 24 hours until the time came to see the car. While I had failed to tell John Anderson over the phone was the fact that I had 3 seemingly insurmountable problems. 1, I hadn't told my folks I was going to buy a car. 2, I didn't have enough money to buy a car. And 3, I absolutely couldn't live another day without owning my own car. It was with that knowledge festering inside of me that I nervously rang John Anderson's doorbell that Thursday afternoon. John Anderson opened the door. He was a slim, tall, nondescript man with neatly cropped blonde hair and bright blue, intelligent-looking eyes. He was in his early 40s, although he looked much younger. He was wearing a khaki shirt, opened the collar, and matching trousers. Both were starched and pressed with military crispness. His brown shoes gleamed. He smiled warmly, shook my hand, invited me in, introduced me to his wife, who was shelling peas at the kitchen table, then led me out to the garage, where he told me he kept the car. The small, white, single-car garage stood separately from the house. I followed John Anderson to the garage door and waited for what seemed like an eternity while he unlocked the large padlock secured to the door handle. As though anticipating the question I didn't have the nerve to ask, he said, I keep the door locked just in case. In case of what? I couldn't imagine until he opened the door. Standing before us was the car, completely enclosed in a tight-fitting canvas tarp. The sole object in the garage, it sat frozen, as though hovering in the space before me. It was a surprise package waiting to be opened, a mystery waiting to be revealed. It was as if John Henderson had brought me to his garage to unveil a secret he had been hiding there for who knows how long. One was about to share for the very first time with me and only me, and his unwitting conspirator. It was almost more than I could bear. Would you like to help me take this off? He asked as he moved to the front of the car, touching the canvas tarp lightly with his hand. Was he kidding? I mumbled something incoherent like, then waited for the instructions I knew would come. Instinctively, I knew you didn't simply grab a tarp like this and dump it to the ground. Unfortunately, I didn't have to wait long. Just exactly what I do, John Henderson said, as if I would have dared to do something else. He moved to the front side of the car, motioned me to the right side of the car with a nod on his head, then reached down and began to pull the tarp straight up overhead. I did the same. Yet, as much as I wanted to follow his lead, I couldn't help but be distracted by what came into view. The car absolutely glistened. First came the chrome bumper, then the light gray rear fender, then the bright burnished red of the tail light. And each turn glistened with a luster of its own. Each part accentuated the other, magnified the other, transformed the other, enriched the other. It was love at first sight. I can see that 47 coupe as clearly, as wonderfully today as I saw it the first time in John Henderson's garage. As we lifted the tan tarp up and over the roof, folding it as he indicated, like a flag, with loving, deliberate attention, we slowly revealed each part of the car. First the chrome bumper, then the gray fender, then the red tail light, the rear window, the roof, the trunk, the chrome trunk handle, until all at once they merged into a whole car, a presence, a shining gift, better than I would have dared to imagine, better than I possibly could have conceived in my mind's eye. After completing the folding, John Henderson took the tarp, opened the trunk of the car, laid the folded tarp down inside, softly but firmly closed the trunk door, then stepped quietly aside, where he stood waiting without saying a word. I think I said, "Wow," but I can't be sure. If I did, it was to myself. The car held me in thrall. The white walls, the chrome hubcaps, the deep, dark, symmetrical thread of tires, the windows, the chrome door handles, the fenders, the doors, the slow lilting curve of the car itself all came together into a luminescent statement about what a car could mean to a 16-year-old boy. More than anything I could have said, or John Henderson could have said, more than anyone could have said, the shimmering little Ford coupe with its meticulous cleanliness, its deep sense of order, said it all. Nothing could have been more to the point. Nothing could have touched me any deeper. Then John Henderson said, "Let's go for a ride." There are 4 categories of preference that every business must satisfy in the minds and hearts of each of its own primary influencers. Visual preferences, emotional preferences, functional preferences, and financial preferences make up what I call the E-Myth Enterprise Matrix. John Henderson intuitively understood this idea. To John Henderson, the sale of his 1947 Ford Coupe was much more than a commercial transaction. Indeed, the car itself was more than a car. To John Henderson, his 1947 Coupe was an idea. The sale of his 1947 Coupe was therefore an extension of that idea, and so was John Henderson himself. And I, without knowing it, my parents and John Anderson's wife, all of us were an extension of that idea. All of us influencers, all of us influence, all of us possessing preferences that needed to be satisfied, that would be satisfied, for the idea to become action, for idea to move into its future and it find itself joined with the world. Visual preferences, emotional preferences, functional preferences, financial preferences. The idea of John Henderson's 1947 Coupe held within it all the possibilities that would unfold, possibilities that were already there in an instant of its conception. With that particular 1947 Ford Coupe resided the 16-year-old boy in John Henderson and me, as well as all mothers, all fathers, all wives. Each of us loved it, hated it, needed it, avoided it, wished it, dreamed it, created it, negated it, defended it, denied it, dreaded it, lusted after it, along with our relationships with each other, our relationships with ourselves, our ideas of a car, our ideas of buying, selling, and money, our ideas of every single unavoidable and interdependent part of this complex, subtle and hopelessly entangled web of interactions and contradictions among the thoughts, feelings, and flesh of virtual strangers. This, after all, was and is what the game of business is all about. What has to become and has remained in my mind and heart a successful business transaction for both John Henderson and me never could have happened had not he instinctively yet unwittingly used the E-Myth Enterprise matrix in his relationship with himself, my parents, his wife, and me. As we drove, he talked. I guess you might say I have a passion for mechanical things, how they look, how they function, how they exceed their own limits, how they fit into the world. It has always been a passion of mine, for as long as I can remember. He turned to look at me and said, "How about you? Does any of this mean anything to you?" "I don't know," I answered. But what John Anderson was saying reminded me of my saxophone teacher more than anything else. "You and Merle could really get along," I suggested to him. I never known anybody as interested as Merle is in how I take things work well as they possibly can. He's an absolutely genius when it comes to fine-tuning my saxophone. All while I figure my horn is about as good as it'll ever get. And then Merle does something to it, and it's totally new horn. Is that what you mean? John Anderson was grinning from ear to ear. That's exactly what he said. That's what this car means to me. It is the perfect 1947 Ford Coupe. If I wanted to buy a used car, I'd want to look at just fine like this. I want it to look just fine like this. I'd want it to drive just like this. I'd want someone to have cared for it just like this. Like it was the most important thing in the world. Like whatever it could be, it was. He turned down a quiet 3-line street, pulled up to the curb and parked. "Why don't you try it?" he said. I think back to it. It is as though I were fated to own that car, as though the ad in the Anaheim Bulletin had been a letter written directly to me, as though the 1947 Ford Coupe in John Anderson's garage written directly to me, as if it was just waiting for me, as though he knew that I would be the only one to call, the only one to show up at his door, and that I could be the only one to drive away in his car, and that whatever needed to be done to accomplish that end, he would do, he would handle, he would take responsibility for. After driving the car back to his garage, replacing the tarp, and locking the garage door, we sat down at his kitchen table to talk business. He never even asked me if I wanted to buy the car. It was a foregone conclusion. Instead, we talked about my problems, my parents, my money, and my need. As we talked, a picture of the car waiting outside in the garage hovered in my mind. As we talked, the feelings of the car steering wheel lingered in my hands. As we talked, I could feel the exhilarating sensation of driving quietly down the 3-line street in my car. I could see the fleeting, shimmering shadows of the leaves as they passed silently overhead in my car. I could see the crystal clear gleam of the windshield, the soft gray sheen of the sheets, and the deep burnished chrome dashboard John Henderson had specially made for my car. As we talked, it was all over but the shouting. John Anderson called my parents. "It seems we have a problem," he said. "Your son wants to buy my car, and I don't think we have a choice in the matter. But before we talk about it, I'd like for us to meet." If I could imagine my mother's dark, worried frown at the other end of the phone, my father's usual uncontrollable anger at being trapped into the discussion he didn't want to have, didn't need at this time. I waited for the explosion, but surprisingly it didn't come. John Anderson listened quietly and attentively for a moment or two, nodded affirmatively a few times, agreed to something apparently suggested by my parents, then hung up the phone. They were coming over in 30 minutes and I was to wait for them. Need I paint you a picture of my parents coming to John Anderson's door, of how weirded I felt standing in the home of someone who only 2 hours before had been a stranger, but who now in some odd and unfathomable way had taken on the mantle of a surrogate father for the special ritual that was unfolding before us. Need I describe waiting for my parents to say hello, to acknowledge my presence, waiting for the thunder of their terrible anger at being caught up in this drama? Need I to paint you a picture of John Anderson's warm and respectful greeting, of the calm, gracious man my parents saw before them in his neat khaki clothes and his neat, normal home, and with his bright yet very calm blue eyes? Need I describe his wife, who by now had become a very real participant in his strangely, naturally unfolding event, smiling warmly in their living room, inviting my parents to take a seat, the coffee and cookies they shared together, with me hovering over the fringes of the conversation like some nervous, fretting, anxious, and pestering old bird? Need I paint a picture for you of the eventual walk to the garage, that mysterious, wondrous place that I had first walked into 2 hours before? Out of respect for John Henderson and out of tolerance for me, my parents were going to look at this car, this troublesome thing that had suddenly brought so much unneeded emotion and disorder to their lives. Need we take in the surprise I witnessed on their faces, especially my father's, as they saw what I had seen waiting in the garage, as my father awkwardly performed the ritual with John Anderson and the spotless tan tarp that I had performed so awkwardly only a short time before? I had never seen the boy in my father's face until that moment. I never saw it again after that day. Need I take you on the unnecessarily but inevitable ride the four of us took, like a hastily assembled family, my father too big and solid at the wheel for such ephemeral occasion, John Anderson relaxed and smiling in the passenger's seat beside him, my mother and I sitting stiffly upright side by side in the small back seat like two dark birds on a telephone wire, staring straight ahead, afraid to look at each other's for some fear some spell might be broken and we could all suddenly and terribly disappear from the face of the earth. Such a strange and dreamy spectacle we must have seen to people as we passed by on the road, as we carry out many separate yet hyphenated steps of this extraordinary ritual. Need we go through each of those still, quiet, intense, vivid, and unforgettable moments that led us all to remarkably and uncomplainingly to the very end? That invisible, magical, and seamless point at which the pieces of this extraordinary yet ordinary ritual finally join together as naturally and as effortlessly as two Velcro strips. Need I say, the deal was done. Visual preferences, emotional preferences, functional preferences, and financial preferences. The potency and vitality of a business can only be actualized to the degree that it feels the possibilities to be discovered within each preference as they are experienced by each of their four primary influencers. If you not believe me, see the car, see the garage, see John Anderson. Feel the order, the control, the exquisite naturalness of this potentially disastrous event. Everyone's preferences were served. My parents, John Anderson's, his wife, and mine. We all got exactly what we needed, what we wanted. It was a marvel of synchronicity. Let's take a look at the categories of preference one at a time. Okay, so these are the 4 takeaway points from chapter 3 of the book, The E-Myth Enterprise, How to Turn a Great Idea into a Thriving Business. There are 4 categories of preference that every business must satisfy in the minds and the hearts of each of its 4 primary influences: visual preferences, emotional preferences, functional preferences, and financial preferences. Okay. They make up of what I call the E-Myth Enterprise. Each of these categories are accompanied by specific criteria that must be met if an enterprise is to be an E-Myth enterprise. Follow me on a journey that will make this clear and significant. They are what make up of what I call the E-Myth Enterprise matrix. Each of these categories is accompanied by specific criteria that must be met if the enterprise is to be an E-Myth enterprise. Follow me on a journey that will make this clear and significant to you. So that is the chapter 2 reading of the book, The E-Myth Enterprise, the E-Myth Enterprise matrix. Okay, is what we just read. So we're going to do a review of this. So if you have not signed up for the Holistic Lifestyle Tribe, make sure you sign up for Holistic Lifestyle Tribe at holisticlifestyletribe.com, where you can catch the review of this underneath the book club. And if you're there, just go on to the next, just scroll down and you're going to see the review underneath the chapter 3 module. So before I go, and I'm going to review this in the Rising Prime, I want to share with y'all how this boy, a man, Michael Gerber, shared his story as a boy buying a car from a guy, Mr. Anderson, right? John Anderson, and the whole process of how it's a surreal transaction. Now, he talked about the visual preferences of that interaction, the emotional preferences, functional and financial preferences, how it made him feel, how everything was presented, the passion behind it, how it was just more than buying a car, how it was an art, how the way it was presented, the whole revelation of the vehicle, the whole test drive of it, it was an experience that was surreal, where every person that took part of that transaction left feeling better, feeling good, feeling amazing. So it was more than just something that they bought with money. It was an experience that a boy and a man will never forget. Even his father experienced that, right? So this is what we want to create with our businesses. We don't want to just create businesses that gives a product or a service to the consumer. We want to do such in such a way where it creates an experience of the visual preferences, emotional preferences, functional preferences, and financial preferences. So that's the beauty of this book, The E-Myth Enterprise, How to Turn a Great Idea into a Thriving Business. This is why I recommend this book, And this is why we're collectively reading this book as part of the Holistic Lifestyle Tribe. So make sure you go and you tap in, you scroll down for the chapter review. All right. So of course, what I'll do is I'm going to review this chapter tomorrow during the Holistic Lifestyle Tribe Rise and Prime session. So if you want to make sure that you stay tuned to all the book reviews, go back to some of the books that we've read before, make sure you go to holisticlifestyletribe.com and join the tribe. You're going to get access to the book club where you can tap into all the previous books that we've read in the lifetime of the tribe. Okay, so I'll see you for the review, and then I'll see you back here for chapter 4. All right, and chapter 4, let me give you a preview of what chapter 4 is about for YouTube. You're going to read it with me, of course. The first category of preference, which are visual preferences. We're going to talk about the visual preferences. The first category of preference, the visual ideal. So that's the next chapter, chapter 4. Peace. Y'all have a good one.